What would you do if an HOA Karen, with her fake smile and a clipboard of petty power, tried to seize your grandfather's old fishing boat? The last thing connecting him to your late grandmother. Right in front of him. Not knowing your family had actually owned that lake for 62 years. That morning, lakeside serenity was still, the water calm like glass, reflecting drifting clouds in the soft glow of dawn. Birds chirped on the railings of the dock. The breeze smelled of damp grass and the faint sweetness of old wood. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful. Until Karen showed up. She marched down the brick path by the lake, each click of her heels on the damp wood pier like a tiny hammer of judgment. In one hand, she gripped a large clipboard, the other clutching a stack of violation notices, eyes scanning every blade of grass, every wooden post, every small imperfection along the shoreline with that look of disdain she wore like perfume. Karen, 52, the self-proclaimed ruler of the HOA, truly believed she controlled every inch of this place because she knew the rules. She fined one family for a trellis painted the wrong OA approved shade. Another was hit with a $300 fine because their car's tire was 3 inches over a driveway line. She loved that power, the way neighbors lowered their heads, afraid to speak whenever they saw her clipboard coming. And that morning, her eyes landed on Lucky Catch. The boat, once painted a bright blue, now weathered with patches of faded paint and light scuffs from years of gentle use, sat quietly tied to the dock. On its small deck was an old but clean wooden seat, my grandfather's tackle box neatly in place, a fishing net folded with care. It wasn't new, it wasn't flashy, but to my grandfather, Lucky Catch was priceless. My grandfather was sitting at the end of the dock, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, eyes on the lake, hair silver in the morning breeze. A softness in his lined face that spoke of years lived with purpose. Lucky Catch wasn't just a fishing boat. It was the last place he felt close to my grandmother, who had passed away after a long battle with cancer. It was where he could still feel her sitting beside him, their hands brushing as they shared quiet stories, laughed at memories, and watched the sunset together. Every evening, he would sit on that boat and quietly speak to her, telling her about his day, about the dreams where she still appeared, about how much he missed her. To Karen, none of that mattered. All she saw was an eyesore, something that lowered the aesthetic standard of her precious lake, and she believed that with one signature and one HOA notice, she could erase it from existence. Karen stopped in front of the dock, that fake smile spreading across her face as she scribbled a note on her clipboard. She looked up, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Mr. Morrison, this boat is in clear violation of HOA lakefront aesthetic guidelines. You have 48 hours to remove it, or the HOA will enforce removal. My grandfather's hand trembled slightly as he placed his coffee cup down on the dock, confusion and hurt in his tired eyes. I'm sorry, what did you say? This boat has been here for over 20 years. It's not bothering anyone. Karen's smirk widened as she flipped a page on her clipboard, her tone robotic cold. Rules are rules, sir. This lake is under HOA jurisdiction, and the HOA has every right to maintain the community's appearance. I suggest you comply. I stepped out of the house, my voice firm. Do you have any idea how important that boat is to my grandfather? Karen turned to me, her eyes scanning me with open disdain before she let out a small, cold laugh. And who are you supposed to be? Feelings don't override the rules, young man. If he doesn't move it, we will call the police. I saw my grandfather look at me, then back at the boat, his hand gripping the edge of his chair, knuckles white, eyes glistening as they darted back to Lucky Catch. Karen turned on her heel, walking away, the sound of her heels on the dock echoing in the morning quiet, leaving behind the strong scent of her perfume, and a bright red violation notice fluttering onto the dock at my grandfather's feet. I bent down to pick up the paper, my hands clenching so hard around it that it crumpled, my eyes locked on Karen's retreating figure, a surge of anger and determination burning in my chest. Karen had no idea she wasn't just threatening to take an old boat. She had just declared war on a man's memories, on his last connection to the woman he loved, and she had awakened a fire inside me that would not stop until I protected what mattered most to him. And what Karen didn't know was that this lake she so confidently claimed to control and regulate had belonged to my family for 62 years. That morning, Lakeside was peaceful, the water shimmering under the soft glow of sunrise, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of damp grass. On the old Lucky Catch, my grandfather sat quietly, steam rising from the coffee cup in his hand, his eyes gazing into the distance, toward the spot where Grandma used to sit, where she used to smile, leaning her head on his shoulder during breezy afternoons. To most people, it was just an old fishing boat, but to him, it was an entire world. It was where he and Grandma would sit for hours, watching the sunset, laughing softly when a fish tugged on the line, holding hands in silence yet understanding everything in each other's hearts. Even when she grew weak from cancer, Grandpa would carefully help her onto the boat each evening, wrapping her in a blanket so she could watch the sunset one more time, even if all she could manage was a faint, tired smile. She once looked at him with those bright eyes and whispered, "Promise me, even if I'm gone, you'll keep coming here and tell me about your days." And he kept that promise. Every morning, he brought 2 cups of coffee onto the boat. One he placed on the wooden seat where she used to sit, the other he held in his hand. Sipping slowly as he told her about the morning, about the ducks swimming past, about the dreams he had where she was still laughing. To an outsider, he might have looked like a lonely old man, mumbling to himself on a creaky boat. But to him, she was still there, still listening, still beside him. That morning, with the sunlight highlighting the lines etched deeply on his face, Grandpa turned to me, his voice steady and low. "I don't care what that Karen says. This boat is all I have left of your grandmother. If they want to take it, they'll have to take me first." I swallowed hard, my throat burning, my fists tightening as I looked into his determined eyes. I saw a single tear roll slowly down his weathered cheek, but he sat tall, his gaze fixed on the lake, unwavering, like a soldier keeping his final promise to the love of his life. In that moment, I realized Lucky Catch was no longer just an old boat. It was dignity, it was love, it was his promise to her, and I knew I wouldn't let Karen or anyone else take that away from him. I stepped closer, reaching for his rough, warm hand, gripping it firmly, nodding as I spoke softly but with conviction. "I promise, Grandpa, I won't let them take this boat." From that moment on, Lucky Catch wasn't just his anymore. It became our mission, to protect what mattered most, to stand against Karen's arrogance and injustice, and to honor a love that had lasted a lifetime. The next morning, the lake wasn't calm. The air felt heavy, like it knew something wrong was about to happen. I was standing on the porch when I heard the harsh clack of heels on the dock, sharp and cold. Karen was approaching, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into that smug, thin smile she wore whenever she believed she was in control. Behind her, 2 HOA volunteers trailed nervously, carrying rolls of caution tape and a folded notice board. Grandpa was already on Lucky Catch, holding his coffee cup, eyes watching the lake as if he could ignore the chaos Karen brought with her. Karen stopped at the edge of the dock, cleared her throat dramatically, and said in that high, clipped tone, "Mr. Morrison, as per HOA Regulation 4.3 subsection, this boat is to be removed immediately. You've failed to comply with the 48-hour notice, so we are here to enforce removal today." She glanced around, making sure neighbors who had peeked from behind curtains were watching. She wanted this moment, wanted to humiliate him, to show everyone she could bend even an old man to her will. Grandpa slowly turned his head, his eyes calm, but his hands trembled just slightly as he placed the coffee cup down on the boat's bench. "This boat has been here longer than you've lived in this neighborhood, Karen," he said quietly. "And it's not leaving." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, dropping her voice low enough for only us to hear, but the venom was clear. "You're a stubborn old man. This eyesore ends today." She snapped her fingers, and the 2 volunteers stepped forward, unrolling the caution tape. One of them looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting on his feet, but Karen glared at him until he started tying the tape to the posts of the dock, blocking off the walkway. I moved forward, anger pulsing through my veins. "You can't do this," I snapped, standing between Karen and the boat. Oh, but I can," Karen said, tilting her head, the corners of her lips twitching in a cold, satisfied smirk. "And I will." At that moment, a tow truck rumbled up the road, pulling a trailer behind it. The sound of the engine echoed like a drumbeat of doom across the water, and Karen turned, waving it forward. The driver stepped out, looking at the boat, then at Grandpa, hesitating. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" Karen didn't even look at him. "Do your job." I turned back to Grandpa, whose shoulders seemed to slump, just for a moment, as the reality sank in. His eyes glistened, but he wiped them quickly, lifting his chin. "I'm not leaving this boat," he said, voice shaking but strong. Karen rolled her eyes. "Then you'll be removed along with it." My fists clenched, every muscle in my body screaming to push her off the dock, to stop her, to do something. But I couldn't. Not yet. The tow truck driver stepped onto the dock with chains in hand, moving toward the boat, and the metal clinked sharply in the heavy morning air. "Don't you dare touch that boat," I shouted. Neighbors had started gathering now, drawn by the noise, their faces pale, horrified as they watched Karen cross a line none of them thought she would. Grandpa looked at me, his eyes saying what words couldn't. "It's okay, Miles." But it wasn't. The driver paused, looking back at Karen. "Mot do it now," Karen hissed. And so he did. The chain clanged against the metal railing of the boat, the hook digging in, the engine of the winch whining as it began to pull. The boat jerked. The ropes creaked, and with each pull, it scraped against the dock, the sound tearing into me like a scream. Grandpa stood up, gripping the railing, tears running down his weathered cheeks, whispering, "I'm sorry, love," as Lucky Catch was dragged toward the trailer, the last piece of them, ripped away. Karen stood there, arms crossed, watching, her eyes cold and victorious. She thought she had won. She thought this was the end. But as I stood there, helpless and shaking with rage, I knew one thing: this was not the end. It was the beginning. That night, Grandpa's house was filled with a heavy silence. There was no soft splash of water against the Lucky Catch. No gentle tapping of the ropes against the dock, just the cold, relentless ticking of the old clock on the wall. I sat in Grandpa's dusty garage under the dim yellow light, surrounded by boxes stacked high, their edges worn with time. I was digging for anything that could help us get Lucky Catch back, to give Grandpa the dignity Karen tried to rip away. I opened each box, flipping through old receipts, manuals for tools long rusted, and photos of Grandpa and Grandma sitting by the dock, smiling in faded Polaroids. I was tired, my fingers covered in dust, but every time I saw Grandma's warm smile, I pushed on, refusing to stop. And then, at the bottom of a stack, I found it, a rusty tin box, Lakeside Papers 1962, scribbled in Grandpa's careful handwriting. My heart thudded in my chest, and my hands trembled as I pried it open, the scent of old paper rushing out, heavy with the weight of decades. Inside was a thick stack of papers, edges yellowed and fragile, handwritten notes mixed with faded red stamps. I turned each page, reading line after line, seal after seal, until I found the words. Certificate of Ownership, Lakeside Pond. Issued March 15, 1962. Owner the Morrison family. I stopped breathing, reading it again and again, eyes widening as the truth sank in. This lake, the one Karen claimed to control, the one she used to threaten neighbors, collect fees, and enforce her petty power, had belonged to my family for 62 years. I flipped through the remaining pages, finding maps of the lake, property boundaries, water rights, and documented permissions for mooring and use of the shoreline. Everything was legitimate, stamped, and signed by local authorities, legal and clear. In that moment, I realized Karen hadn't just made a mistake by taking Grandpa's boat. She had made the biggest mistake of her life when she tried to cross our family over something we owned. I clutched the documents and rushed to the living room, where Grandpa was sitting in front of Grandma's small altar. His eyes red and tired, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. I placed the documents in front of him, my voice shaking but firm. "Grandpa, we didn't lose the lake. We never did. We own it. We've always owned it." He looked at me, his faded blue eyes sharpening, light flickering where there was only exhaustion before. His hands, rough and thin, shook as he picked up the certificate, reading slowly, carefully, his lips moving over every word. A tear slid down his cheek, but this time it wasn't from defeat. It was hope. He looked up at me, voice cracking, "Your grandma would be so proud of you, Miles." I squeezed his hand, feeling the strength returning to him. "We're going to get Lucky Catch back, Grandpa. We're going to make things right, for you, for Grandma, and for everyone Karen has bullied." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, drafting messages and plans, calling neighbors quietly. Dave, who had been fined unfairly for parking, Mrs. Wilson, who had cried over a $150 fine for flowers in the wrong color pot, and the Paddles, who had been threatened over a basketball hoop. I sent them pictures of the documents, explaining everything. There was silence on the line each time, followed by a sharp inhale, then quiet, trembling voices saying, "Tell us what you need us to do." We set a date. Thursday night, the HOA meeting. Karen would walk in, clipboard in hand, fully expecting to strut around, handing out fines, scolding people for grass length, or for leaving a trash bin out an hour too long. But she didn't know that this time, it would be different. This time, she would face the truth. She would learn that the lake she thought she ruled over had never been hers to control. Thursday night came, and Lakeside Serenity's community center was packed tighter than I had ever seen it. The air buzzed with tension as neighbors, usually quiet and cautious, now sat forward in their chairs, phones ready, eyes sharp, waiting for something they could feel was about to happen. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Karen strutted in, her heels tapping confidently against the floor, clipboard in hand, lips curved into that same smug smile she wore every time she announced another fine, another violation. She didn't even glance at the faces around her, too used to them dropping their eyes when she entered the room. But tonight, no one looked away. Tonight, we were ready. She cleared her throat dramatically as she reached the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, flipping through her notes. "We have several items on the agenda, including unresolved fines, parking issues, and..." I stood up. Her eyes flicked toward me, annoyance flashing for a split second before she caught herself. "Excuse me, Miles, but you'll have to wait until I finish the agenda." I took a breath, lifting the thick stack of papers in my hands, letting it thud against the table so everyone could see. Actually, Karen, this is about the agenda. And it concerns every single person in this room. A murmur rippled across the crowd. Karen's smile twitched, but she straightened her clipboard, trying to keep control. I raised my voice, clear and steady, so no one would miss a word. This lake. Lakeside Pond. The one Karen has been collecting fees for, threatening people over, enforcing her rules on. I lifted the certificate, holding it for all to see. Has belonged to my family since 1962. Silence. Total perfect silence, broken only by the quiet, sharp intake of breath from neighbors around the room. Karen blinked, her smile faltering. That's ridiculous, she scoffed, though her voice cracked at the edges. This is HOA property, and you know that. No, I interrupted, opening the document and reading aloud the exact lines, the date, the official stamps, the signatures. I passed the copies around, watching neighbors' eyes widen as they read the undeniable truth. Dave was the first to speak up, his voice loud, cutting through the tension. So, you mean to say that all those fees we've been paying to use the lake were collected illegally? Mrs. Wilson stood up, holding the papers, her hands shaking. I've paid over $3,000 in fees for my family to fish on weekends. Karen, you told us we had to. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I kept going, my voice strong. Karen, you fined people, threatened them. Even took my grandfather's boat, on property you have no legal right to control. You humiliated a man who served this community for decades, who was simply trying to keep a promise to his wife. All eyes turned to Karen. Some were angry. Others were hurt, but none looked at her with fear anymore. She tried to speak, her voice tight. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, I said, cutting her off. We verified everything with the county. And let me remind you, everyone here has been a victim of your lies. Phones were out now, recording every second, neighbors whispering, their faces hardening as they realized the years they had spent intimidated, shamed, and fined by someone who never had the right. Karen's hands shook as she clutched her clipboard like a shield, eyes darting toward the exit as if planning her escape. Dave stepped forward, phone recording, his voice calm but cold. Karen, you owe every family in this room an apology, and you owe them their money back. Mrs. Wilson raised her voice, tears in her eyes. And you owe Sam his boat back, today. Karen's lip quivered, the room closing in on her, the weight of dozens of angry, betrayed neighbors pressing down. And in that moment, Karen realized her reign was over. She had bullied people, humiliated families, and tried to break an old man's spirit, believing she was untouchable. But the truth she never saw coming was that she had no power here. And as the phones kept recording, as the neighbors demanded answers, Karen could only stand there, trapped in the consequences of her own greed, while the truth echoed in that room. The lake never belonged to her. Karen stood frozen at the front of the room, clutching her clipboard like it was the last lifeline of her collapsing power. Her face had drained of color, her eyes darting around the room, searching for support among the neighbors she used to intimidate. But tonight, no one looked away. There was no fear, no silence. Only the quiet, pulsing demand for justice. Dave raised his phone, live streaming, his voice cutting through the tension. Karen, there are over 800 people watching this live. Do you have anything you'd like to say to Mr. Sam? To all of us? Karen opened her mouth, but her voice cracked. I don't. I stepped forward, steady and calm, but firm. Karen, you will return my grandfather's boat. You will apologize to him in front of everyone here. And you will refund the illegal lake fees you've taken from these people. A single clap echoed. Then another. And then the room filled with applause. A wave of sound that made Karen flinch, confirming to her that she had lost control. Karen's eyes welled up, a tear slipping down her cheek, mixed with anger and humiliation as she whispered, "Fine, I will return the boat. I'll apologize to Mr. Sam." The room fell silent as those words left her lips. Grandpa, sitting in the front row, tears in his eyes, lifted his chin, pride and quiet strength shining through the lines of age and loss. Karen's voice trembled. I will work with the HOA to refund the lake fees to all residents within 30 days. Dave lowered his phone and nodded, stepping closer, his voice calm but resolute. And you will resign from the HOA. Tonight. Karen's shoulders slumped, her eyes fell to the floor, and the clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering onto the tile with a sharp clack. She nodded, unable to find her voice. I resign. A collective exhale swept through the room, followed by cheers and claps, this time filled with relief and unity. Karen lowered her head, walking through the crowd that stepped aside for her, not out of fear, but because no one wanted to stand too close to her anymore. As the door shut behind her, a wave of peace filled the room for the first time in years. The next morning, a truck arrived at the lake, carrying Lucky Catch home. The sky was clear, the sun reflecting off the gentle ripples of the water, making it look like it was dressed in gold. The same driver who had once taken the boat away climbed down from the truck, looking at Grandpa with a small, apologetic smile. "Mr. Sam, I'm sorry. I was just following orders. I'm glad I get to bring her back." Grandpa stepped forward, placing his trembling hand on the boat's worn railing, running his fingers over the scratches and dents that were a map of memories. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Welcome home, old girl." Neighbors gathered around the lake, some placing hands on Grandpa's shoulder, others helping lower the boat gently back into the water. As Lucky Catch touched the lake, the water rippled softly, reflecting the small photograph of Grandma, taped to the inside railing, her smile bright and full of life. Grandpa climbed aboard, turning back to look at us on the shore. I stood there, smiling, meeting his eyes as the breeze played with his white hair, a look of calm and gratitude replacing the pain and loss that had weighed on him for so long. That day, Lucky Catch wasn't just returned. It came back as a symbol of a community's victory over injustice. A symbol of love, promises kept, and the quiet power of protecting what truly matters. And on that day, standing by the water, I realized, when people stand together, no bully can steal their peace. Karen was gone. The day after the HOA meeting, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked from behind blinds, watching boxes carried out one by one. Karen herself never came outside, never made eye contact, never said goodbye. And just like that, the woman who had ruled the neighborhood with fear for 6 long years vanished. Some said she moved to another state. Others whispered she was facing legal trouble over the illegal lake fees. No one knew for sure, and no one really cared. For the first time in years, Lakeside Serenity felt like its name again. Neighbors began talking to each other more, waving as they watered lawns, offering help without fear of fines or threats. Children played by the lake without parents worrying about violations. People brought out old fishing rods and kayaks, laughing as they remembered why they moved here in the first place. Grandpa and I worked on Lucky Catch, scrubbing the hull, patching the small cracks, repainting it in the same gentle blue it once wore proudly. Neighbors stopped by to help, some bringing coffee, others lending tools, all eager to be part of this restoration. The lake, once a symbol of Karen's control, was now alive with voices and laughter. One afternoon, as we were finishing the last coat of paint, Grandpa sat on the dock, staring at the boat with a soft smile. The breeze ruffled his white hair, and the lake reflected the sky in rippling blues and golds. "You know," he said quietly, "your grandma would have loved seeing this. All of us here, together." I sat down beside him, the smell of fresh paint mixing with the scent of the lake, and nodded. "She would have loved it, Grandpa, and she would have been proud of you for fighting to keep your promise." With the illegal lake fees refunded, the community decided to use the money to improve Lakeside for everyone. We fixed the docks, added benches by the shore, and planted flower beds in Grandma's favorite colors, soft yellows and bright blues. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low, turning the lake into liquid gold, the community gathered at the dock for something special. A plaque was unveiled, polished and shining, mounted on the dock where Grandpa kept Lucky Catch, Eleanor's Landing, in memory of love that lasts, and the promise kept. Grandpa stood silently, tears streaming down his face as he ran his fingers over her name. He turned, looking at the neighbors who had come to support him, at me standing beside him, and at the lake that had witnessed so much of their love. He stepped onto Lucky Catch once more, holding the small framed photo of Grandma, placing it on the seat beside him as he pushed off the dock. The boat drifted gently, the water rippling softly, carrying him into the golden light of the setting sun. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the community erupted in soft claps, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling, knowing they had witnessed something bigger than a boat, bigger than a neighborhood dispute. They had witnessed the quiet victory of love, of community, of dignity reclaimed. That night, as Grandpa and I sat on the porch, the lake glimmering under the moonlight, he turned to me. "Thank you, Miles," he said, his voice steady, filled with gratitude and peace. "For fighting for me. For her. For all of this." I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of it, the strength that came not from power, but from love. "Thank you for teaching me what matters, Grandpa." Karen's chapter in Lakeside Serenity was over. What remained was a stronger, kinder community. A lake that was free again, and a promise, kept forever, on a boat named Lucky Catch, drifting peacefully under the stars, carrying the memory of a love that never died. One early morning, I stepped out onto the porch. The mist floating gently over Lakeside, the first rays of sun laying a golden path across the rippling water. A soft breeze carried the scent of damp grass and the gentle chorus of birds, mixing with the quiet lap of water against Lucky Catch, tied calmly at the dock. Grandpa was sitting on the boat, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, the photo of Grandma smiling brightly beside him. He whispered something softly, then smiled, his eyes filled with a peace I hadn't seen in years. I realized that through all the storms Karen had brought, what remained wasn't bitterness. It was love. It was the bond between people who had once been strangers, now united in protecting what was right. It was a promise kept, by a man who stood firm for the memory of the woman he loved, and by a community that finally found its courage to stand together for justice. Lakeside was still the same lake, yet it had changed forever. Children's laughter now echoed along its shores, small boats drifted under the afternoon sun, neighbors stopped to check in on each other, small gatherings took place by the water, and Lucky Catch still set out each morning, carrying with it the story of love and quiet strength. I closed the notebook where I had recorded this story, smiling as I breathed in the fresh air, listening to the water, the wind, and Grandpa softly saying Grandma's name. Because sometimes, winning isn't about defeating someone else. It's about overcoming the fear inside you, and holding on to what truly matters, no matter who tries to take it away. The story of Karen, Lakeside, and Lucky Catch ends here, leaving behind one clear lesson: when we stand together, when we dare to speak up, no bully can ever steal our peace. Life isn't always fair. But the story of Grandpa Sam, Lucky Catch, and the Lakeside community showed us a powerful truth: no one can take away your peace, your love, or your precious memories if you are brave enough to stand up and protect them. You may not be wealthy, you may not have power or status in society. But if you hold on to your faith, treasure what truly matters, and dare to speak up when what is right is under threat, then you are stronger than any bully who tries to steal your peace. Because sometimes, victory isn't about defeating someone else. It's about overcoming the fear inside you. It's about standing up, protecting what you love, holding on to your values, and refusing to let anyone take away the peace within your soul. That is how you truly live fully and freely, even in a world that isn't always fair. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit like if you believe that love and community can overcome anything. Comment below what is your lucky catch in life that you would protect no matter what. And if you want more stories that remind you of what truly matters, subscribe and join this growing community that believes in kindness, courage, and standing up for what is right. Because here, your story matters.